Welcome to City Vision University's podcast, providing book summaries of books on rescue missions, city missions, and the Salvation Army.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, of course. So I want you to imagine, just for a second, this incredibly dense, suffocating jungle.
Okay.
Like a place where the canopy of trees is so thick that the sun just literally never reaches the ground.
Sounds pretty bleak.
Right, with this fetid malarial swamp. And the people living there are just in this constant, brutalizing state of basic survival.
Yeah, sounds intense.
It is. But what if I told you, and this is for you listening at home too, what if I told you this jungle wasn't in, the Congo or the Amazon?
Oh, right.
But it was actually sitting right in the very center of the wealthiest, most powerful empire the world had ever seen.
Yeah, right in the heart of London.
Exactly. So welcome to our custom-tailored deep dive today. We are really getting into it.
We definitely are.
Because we aren't just looking at a piece of history here. We are dissecting what is essentially a survival manual for the absolute abyss.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
We're pulling apart this 1890 manifesto called In Darkest England and the Way Out.
Written by General William Booth.
Right, the founder of the Salvation Army.
And I just have to say, it is a phenomenal text to unpack.
It really is.
Not just because of the sheer scale of what he's proposing, but because of the intensely personal crucible that it was forged in.
Yeah, let's talk about that background a bit.
Well, right at the very beginning of the book, Booth dedicates this monumental blueprint to his wife.
Catherine Booth, right.
Yes, Catherine. And they had been companions and co-warriors in this movement for 40 years.
Wow, 40 years.
Yeah. She shared every single one of his ambitions for human welfare.
Right.
And the really heartbreaking reality here is that while he was finalizing the pages of this sweeping social plan, she was actually suffering from a terminal illness.
Oh, wow. I mean, I can't even imagine the pressure.
It's tragic. The text actually mentions that she found relief in her agonizing final days by discussing and developing these very suggestions with him.
Wait, really?
Yeah, for the social and spiritual salvation of the people.
So they're literally on her deathbed, mapping out how to save millions of people.
Exactly. So when you read this, you aren't just reading, the detached theories of some academic in an ivory tower.
Right. It's not a dry sociological paper.
Not at all. You are reading a manifesto that is charged with this profound, almost desperate sense of urgency.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
It's baked into every single page by a man who is watching his partner slip away, all while trying to save just countless others from the slums.
Okay, let's unpack this, because reading this 1890 document feels less like reading a regular historical book and much more like examining a master blueprint for a social revolution.
It really does.
It's kind of equal parts sociology, religious crusade, and maybe most surprisingly for someone reading it today, an absolute logistical masterclass.
Oh, the logistics are wild.
Right. Booth looked at the horrifying depths of Victorian poverty, and he flat out refused to accept it.
Yeah, he wouldn't just say, well, that's just how society works.
Exactly. He refused to see it as some unsolvable fact of nature, like a slough of despond.
Right.
He didn't just write a lament about how sad everything was. He engineered this massive, radical, highly practical three-tier machine.
To rescue what he called the submerged tenth of society.
The submerged tenth, yeah. But to even get Victorian high society to look at this blueprint, he really had to shatter their complacency, didn't he?
He absolutely had to,
He had to conceptualize the problem in a way that just bypassed their enormous blind spots entirely.
Precisely. And that requires a truly brilliant rhetorical strategy.
Yeah.
To make Londoners care about Londoners, Booth paradoxically had to look at Africa.
Which seems so counterintuitive.
It does. But he lifted a comparison that was basically dominating the global conversation in 1890.
Right, Henry Morton Stanley.
Exactly, the famous explorer. He had just returned from this grueling, highly publicized expedition through the Congo,
right,
which Stanley chronicled in his massive bestseller, In Darkest Africa.
Ah, so that's where the title comes from.
Yes. Booth takes that title, twists it to In Darkest England, and he uses Stanley's expedition as this relentless, visceral metaphor for the East End of London.
Yeah, the sources we looked at detail how Stanley described marching and tearing and plowing his way for 160 days through this impenetrable tropical forest.
Just a total nightmare landscape.
Yeah. Trees that were 180 feet tall, literally blocking out all the light.
Yeah.
Stanley wrote about the physical gloom, the constant rotting rain, the malaria,
Right.
and the people living there who couldn't even conceive of a world outside the dark forest. They had no concept of sunlight or open pastures.
Yeah.
And Booth takes this horrifying exotic picture and he just maps it one-to-one onto the slums of his own city.
It's a really stark, uncompromising mapping, too.
Yeah. How does he frame it?
Well, Booth argues that the physical malaria of the African swamp is mirrored exactly by the foul, fetid breath of the London slums.
Right. The air quality alone.
Exactly. The cramped tenements, the absolute lack of sanitation, the open sewers. He says this environment poisons and starves thousands of children every year, just as surely as any tropical disease would.
I know.
But he pushes the analogy even deeper into the social structure itself.
How so?
So, Stanley describes the utter devastation brought to the African forest by ivory raiders.
Okay.
These were men who arrived with muskets to plunder the land, slay the inhabitants, and basically exploit the domestic affections of the forest dwellers for profit.
Right.
Booth explicitly points to these ivory raiders and says to his readers, hey, we have them here too.
Who does he compare them to?
He compares them to the publicans, the tavern owners, who flourish by feeding the addictions of the poor.
Oh, okay.
And crucially, to the sweating employers.
The sweating employers. Yeah, he goes hard after them.
He does. He says they grind the faces of the working class.
Yeah, he is absolutely blistering in his description of those employers.
Oh, completely unsparing.
He talks about how they deliberately defraud workmen of their pay and exploit the desperate vulnerability of the widow and the orphan. And then they turn around and pretend to be these grand philanthropists.
Yeah, the hypocrisy is what gets him.
He even points out that these same men get elected to Parliament to make the very laws that govern the people they are exploiting.
Exactly.
Now, just to be perfectly clear to you listening at home, we are strictly conveying Booth's 1890 perspective from the text
Yeah,
here.
very important to know.
We aren't taking any modern political stance on employers or parliamentarians, but we do have to understand that Booth was completely unsparing in his critique of the systemic economic exploitation he witnessed daily.
Right, that is a very important distinction to maintain. We are analyzing a 19th century worldview here.
Exactly.
And what's fascinating here is why Booth leans so heavily into this exotic African framing.
Right, like why not just write a straightforward sociological report?
Because he is aggressively calling out the profound hypocrisy of his own civilization.
Yeah.
He is looking at a Victorian society that shudders in horror at the stories of African slavery.
Right, they read the papers and gasped.
Exactly. It's a society that raises massive funds, holds these grand galas, and sends military expeditions to stop the slave trade abroad.
Which is good, obviously.
Of course. Yet that exact same society completely ignores the penniless orphan girl in Christian London.
Right, in their own backyard.
Yes. A girl who is hunted from pillar to post by exploitative employers, paid wages she literally cannot survive on,
Right.
and is ultimately forced into this agonizing choice to, quote, starve or sin.
Meaning either die of malnutrition or turn to prostitution.
Exactly. Booth is basically forcing his affluent readers to look in the mirror.
Yeah.
He wants them to realize that their glorious civilization is breeding its own barbarians, its own outcasts, right within a stone's throw of their grand cathedrals and palaces.
And he even maps the specific people Stanley encountered too, doesn't he?
He does.
Like Stanley categorized the denizens of the African forest into two types of quote-unquote pygmies.
Right.
He described one as a very degraded specimen, almost baboon-like.
Yeah.
And the other as very handsome, intelligent, but they were these silent toilers who worked with consuming zeal but had no hope.
Right.
And Booth matches those exactly to the people in the slums.
Yeah, the mapping is very deliberate.
He compares them to the vicious, lazy lout who has given up and turned to crime, and the toiling slave who works 18 hours a day in a sweatshop just to afford a crust of bread.
Exactly.
Both of them, just like the forest dwellers, have lost all faith that life could ever be anything other than a dark tangle of vice and poverty.
Yes. Just pure misery.
But let me push back a little here, because there seems to be an inherent psychological risk in this strategy.
Okay, what do you mean?
Well, if you compare the poverty of your own city to an unexplored, endless, impenetrable jungle,
Yeah.
doesn't it risk making the problem seem simply too massive to solve?
Oh, I see.
Like, if you tell the public there are 10,000 million trees that need clearing, human nature dictates they might just throw their hands up.
Right.
They might just say, well, we can't possibly fix that. It's too big.
Yeah, and Booth actually anticipates that exact pushback.
Oh, he does?
Yeah, he acknowledges the danger of fatalism. He notes that many social reformers start out like Stanley's 40 pioneers.
Okay.
They enter the slums swinging their axes blithely, full of energy and idealism.
Right. Ready to change the world.
But very quickly they become depressed and despairing.
Because it's just too much.
Exactly. The sheer scale of the misery overwhelms them, and they ask, who can battle against this endless tangle?
Right.
But Booth uses the Stanley analogy to execute this brilliant pivot toward hope.
How so?
He reminds his readers that Stanley did not succumb to the terrors of the forest because Stanley knew the forest was not endless. He had faith that there was light and pasturage and a way out beyond it.
A way out.
Exactly, the second half of the book's title. Booth's central thesis is that Darkest England is also not interminable.
Right.
He flatly refuses the fatalism of despair. He refuses to accept the prevailing Victorian notion that it is just the inexorable natural destiny of thousands of Englishmen to be brutalized by their environment.
He famously says, I think I see my way out.
Yes.
And that realization really marks a massive shift in the text.
It definitely changes the tone.
Because he moves away from the sweeping rhetorical metaphors of jungles and morasses.
Right, the poetry stops.
Yeah, and he pivots directly into hard, cold, undeniable Victorian statistics.
Yes, the numbers.
Because once you establish that the jungle is real, you can't just talk about it abstractly anymore.
No, you have to prove it.
You have to measure the abyss.
Yeah.
You have to quantify exactly who is lost inside it.
Precisely. You move from the qualitative horror to the quantitative reality.
Right.
And this is where Booth introduces one of the most famous concepts of the era.
The submerged tenth.
Your submerged tenth, exactly. And to figure out the true scale of the problem, he doesn't just guess.
No, he brings receipts.
He relies on an incredibly rigorous industrial census of East London.
Right.
And that census had recently been conducted by another man, Charles Booth.
Who, fascinatingly, was of no relation to William Booth, right?
Right, no relation at all, just a coincidence.
Okay, so what did Charles Booth's census look like?
Well, Charles Booth had mapped out the poverty in a district of about 900,000 people.
Wow, that's a huge sample size.
Massive. And he created these incredibly detailed, color-coded maps showing street by street who was wealthy, who was poor, and who was semi-criminal.
Oh, wow.
So General William Booth takes that East London statistical baseline and extrapolates it across the whole of Great Britain.
Which at the time had a total population of about 31 million.
Exactly.
And the breakdown he provides in the text is just staggering.
It really is.
When you do the math, Booth calculates that roughly 3 million people are entirely destitute.
3 million.
Yeah, and he breaks it down into distinct categories to make it understandable.
So how does he break it down?
So about 1 million are homeless or actively starving on the streets.
It's out in the open.
Right. Another 1 million are locked away in workhouses, asylums, or prisons.
Okay, so institutionalized.
Exactly. And a third million are barely surviving on the very edge of the abyss.
Just clinging on.
Right. They are intermittently earning just enough to stay out of the workhouse for a week, only to fall back the next.
It's a constant cycle.
Yeah. So 3 million people, let's put that in perspective for you, the listener. At that time, 3 million people was a population roughly equal to the entirety of Scotland.
Wow.
Imagine the entire population of Scotland existing in a state of abject, crushing destitution, fully contained within the borders of the wealthiest empire on earth.
It's an immense, almost unfathomable scale of human suffering.
Yeah, it hurts your brain to even think about it.
It does. And the philosophical question becomes, well, how should a civilized society respond to an entire Scotland's worth of destitute citizens?
Right.
To answer that, Booth introduces what is arguably the most brilliant and enduring analogy in the entire manifesto.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
He calls it the cab horse charter.
Yes. I love this part of the book. Let's really dig into the mechanics of this argument.
It's so good. So Booth sets this up by quoting the philosopher Thomas Carlyle.
Okay.
He points out a daily occurrence in Victorian London.
Right. Cab horses are everywhere.
Everywhere. So when a cab horse, a literal horse, pulling a carriage in the busy streets, when that horse wearies, trips, and falls stretched out on the cobblestones in the middle of the traffic, what happens?
Right.
Society doesn't gather around the fallen horse and debate how it came to stumble.
Yeah, they don't form a committee.
Exactly. They don't ask if the horse was lazy or careless, or if it was the horse's own moral failing that caused it to break its knees.
Right. The immediate reaction is pragmatic action.
Yes.
The first thing people do is unbuckle the harness.
They get to work.
If it's tangled, they literally cut the leather.
Right.
They take the heavy load off the animal.
Yeah.
And they physically help the horse back onto its feet.
Exactly.
And then once that horse is standing, society implicitly guarantees the animal 3 basic things.
What are they?
A shelter for the night to protect it from the weather, food for its stomach, and work allotted to it by which it can earn its corn.
Earn its keep. Right.
Yeah, that baseline of intervention and sustenance is the cab horse charter.
And Booth wields this analogy like a hammer.
It's so effective.
It really is. He asks a devastating, unanswerable question.
Which is?
Why is it that a 4-footed worker is guaranteed a level of care that a 2-handed human worker is not?
Oof. Yeah.
He establishes this as his baseline, his humble standard.
Right, he's not asking for mansions.
No, just the standard of a horse. He argues that if we can just achieve the cab horse charter for human beings, if we can commit to picking them up when they fall, taking the crushing load off their backs, and guaranteeing them food, shelter, and a way to earn their keep, we will have solved the worst, most agonizing problems of modern society.
It's such an incredibly pragmatic, almost mechanical way to look at human welfare.
It really takes the emotion out of it in a useful way.
Yeah, it reminds me of how we treat our infrastructure today.
Oh, how so?
Well, it's like having a dedicated tech support policy to immediately reboot and repair our machines the second they crash, so they don't block the network traffic.
Oh, right. That's a great comparison.
But when the human operators short circuit, when they burn out and collapse, we just step over them and leave them on the floor.
Yeah, exactly.
How did Victorian society intellectually justify this? Like, how did they justify treating human beings worse than carriage horses?
Well, they justified it through the bureaucratic mechanisms of the state. Specifically, the poor law system.
Right, the poor, yeah.
The state could point to the poor law and say, look, we theoretically provide for the destitute. No one has to starve.
Theoretically being the key word there.
Right, because as Booth meticulously points out, the state provided that relief by making it so profoundly repulsive, punitive, and humiliating that people would literally choose to starve in an alleyway rather than accept it.
Oh my gosh.
If you had lost absolutely everything and were totally destitute, your option was the workhouse.
Right, the dreaded workhouse.
But entering the workhouse meant bartering away your fundamental liberty.
Yeah.
Families were routinely separated. Husbands from wives, parents from children.
That's just cruel.
It was. You were stripped of your clothes, put in a uniform, and treated as a quasi-criminal whose poverty was basically viewed as a moral disease to be punished.
Wow. But what if you weren't totally destitute?
What do you mean?
Like, what if you were just temporarily out of work, lost your lodgings, and you just needed a place to sleep while you looked for a job the next day?
Oh, then you went to what was called the casual ward for a night's lodging.
Okay, the casual ward.
But the casual ward was explicitly designed by policymakers to deter you from ever coming back.
So it's terrible on purpose.
Exactly. It was a weaponized form of charity.
Yikes.
In exchange for a piece of dry bread and a pint of watered-down gruel, which they called skilly.
Skilly, wow.
You had to perform exhausting, physically destructive, and entirely meaningless labor.
Like what?
You might be forced to break 10 hundredweight of stones.
Just breaking rocks.
Just breaking rocks. Or worse, pick 4 pounds of oakum.
Okay, we should definitely explain what oakum picking actually entails.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because it sounds kind of quaint, like picking berries or something, but it was basically torture.
Absolute torture.
It meant taking old, heavily tarred ropes from naval ships.
Right.
And manually untwisting them, picking them apart into individual fibers so the material could be reused to caulk ships.
Oh, it was awful.
It literally tore your fingernails off. It made your fingers bleed constantly. It was mindless, soul-crushing labor.
Exactly. It was designed to be worse than the lowest-paying job on the outside market.
Right.
And crucially, Booth points out the fundamental flaw in this whole system.
What's that?
These tasks kept you locked up in the casual ward for the entire morning.
Oh, wait.
Yeah. By the time you finished your mandated stone breaking or oakum picking, it was midday.
Okay.
You were exhausted, your hands were bleeding, and you were finally released into the streets to hunt for work.
But midday is too late.
Exactly. All the employers did their hiring at the crack of dawn.
Oh, my gosh.
So by keeping the men locked up, the state actively prevented them from finding actual employment.
That is infuriating.
It is. The system theoretically provided a safety net, but in practice, it functioned as a trap that institutionalized destitution and systematically stripped people of their dignity.
So the state system isn't just broken, It's actively hostile.
Right.
The safety net is a spider web.
That's exactly what it was.
Now, up to this point in the manifesto, we've talked about the abstract statistics.
Right, the 3 million people.
Yeah, and we've analyzed the systemic failures of the workhouses and the poor law.
Right?
But Booth knows that statistics don't bleed.
No, they don't.
He doesn't let the reader stay safely in the abstract. He forces us down to the deeply personal, agonizing level.
Yeah, he really gets granular.
Who exactly are these 3 million people? What do they look like? What are their stories?
And this is where Booth's narrative really transitions from sociology into incredibly visceral, heartbreaking journalism. Yeah. He includes verbatim reports from his Salvation Army officers.
Yeah, right.
These were officers sent out into the night to report on the actual physical condition of the homeless.
What did they find?
He paints this highly specific scene from midsummer 1890. Big Ben strikes 2 in the morning.
Okay.
The moonlight flashes across the dark water of the Thames, lighting up the stonework of the embankment.
Right.
And there, on those cold stone abutments, which offer only a slight parapet for protection from the biting wind coming off the river, are hundreds of men and women.
Just sleeping on the stone.
They are lying side by side, huddled together to share whatever body heat they have left.
And the details these officers gathered are just devastating.
They really are.
They didn't just count the bodies. They went down the line of sleeping forms, woke them up gently, and actually interviewed them.
Yeah, they asked for their stories.
They asked, how did you get here?
Right.
And they found a 54-year-old confectioner from Dartford.
A confectioner?
Yeah, he had a solid trade.
Yeah.
But he got fired simply because he was getting elderly and had developed rheumatism.
Oh, man.
His employer realized they could hire younger, stronger men for cheaper.
So they just tossed him out.
Yeah. So this older man had walked all the way from Dartford to Woolwich, which is miles and miles, looking for any kind of work.
Did he find anything?
He found nothing. He survived that entire day by eating a single piece of discarded bread he found wrapped in newspaper lying in the road.
It's just so bleak. And then the officers spoke to a featherbed dresser.
Okay, what happened to him?
Well, this man's trade had slowly gone out of fashion, which is, a common economic tragedy.
Right, industries change.
But his situation was compounded by a physical one. He had developed a cataract and had completely lost sight in one eye.
Oh, wow.
He was surviving on the streets by doing erratic odd jobs, like holding the reins of a gentleman's horse for a copper coin.
Just scraping by.
Barely even that. He regularly went 2 or 3 days without a single bite of food.
And Booth really shatters the illusion that poverty only happens to uneducated laborers.
He definitely does.
Like, the officers interviewed a man dressed in shining, greasy rags who used to hold a very good position in a money office.
A money office?
Yeah, he had worked as a respectable clerk at a bank for 9 solid years.
Wow, 9 years.
His pedigree was impeccable. His uncle and grandfather were clergymen.
So he was solidly middle class.
Exactly. But he lost his job through no fault of his own when his employer went unexpectedly bankrupt.
Oh, no.
And because the market was flooded with applicants, he couldn't secure another clerk's position.
Right, too much competition.
His savings dried up. His clothes became shabby, which made him even less employable.
It's a downward spiral.
It is. And now, this nephew of a clergyman is sleeping on the freezing stone of the embankment.
We also see the terrifying vulnerability of youth in these interviews.
Oh, yeah.
They found a 16-year-old lad who had run away from an industrial school.
16 years old.
Just a kid. He was trying to live independently by selling matches and carrying parcels for shoppers.
Wow.
The day the officers interviewed him, he had survived entirely by eating thrown-away, rotting cherries he found near a market.
Rotting cherries?
A 16-year-old boy, sleeping rough in the open air for 6 months.
But of all the case studies Booth presents, there is one that just haunts the entire book for me.
Yeah, I know the one you're talking about.
The case of Richard O.
Right.
This is one of the most tragic, difficult stories to read, and it fully encapsulates the desperation Booth is trying to convey.
It really does.
Richard O. was a highly respectable chemist in Holloway, 50 years old.
Okay.
He hit a patch of unemployment, his business failed, and he was driven hard to the wall.
Right.
He spent 6 weeks traveling from morning till night, walking the soles off his shoes, looking for any kind of work, and he didn't earn a single farthing.
Wow.
He was completely, utterly broken.
And the letter he left behind is just a chilling, profound human document.
It's so hard to read.
It is. In his absolute despair, unable to face the degradation of the workhouse that we just described.
Right, because who would want that?
Exactly. And finding absolutely no help from his wealthy relatives or his local clergymen.
Wow, they just ignored him.
They did. He and his wife made a desperate, horrific pact.
Oh my God.
They poisoned their only child.
It's just unfathomable.
As he wrote in his letter, they did it, quote, out of pure love and affection.
Wow.
Because they could not bear the thought of the child being taunted with their crime of poverty or suffering the slow starvation they were experiencing.
Oh.
After poisoning the child, he and his wife both cut their own throats.
Did they survive?
Miraculously, or perhaps tragically given their intent, the suicide attempt failed.
Oh, wow.
They survived, and they were actually placed on trial for the attempted murder of their child.
That is wow. In that letter, he wrote that he was, quote, driven wickedly mad by the complete lack of any bright prospect, any ray of hope. And the detail that just twists the knife is when he specifically mentions that a mere 3 pounds.
2 pounds.
Yeah, an amount he calls a flea bite to his rich uncle.
Right.
That money would have paid their back rent, bought them some food, and literally saved their lives.
It's such a tiny amount of money.
3 pounds was the difference between a respectable family and a double murder-suicide.
And this specific case perfectly illustrates the immense psychological toll of the hunt for work that Booth analyzes.
Yeah.
Booth makes a really profound economic and philosophical point here.
What's his point?
He emphasizes that a poor man's labor is his only capital.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. When a rich man's capital sits idle, he can put it in a bank and it passively earns interest.
Right.
But when a laborer cannot find work, his capital is his time and his physical energy.
Yeah.
And every single day he spends unemployed, that capital is wasted, squandered, never to return.
It's gone forever.
It is an actively depreciating asset. The slow starvation, the wearing down of the physical body from walking miles every day, and the crushing of the spirit create this agonizing state of vulnerability.
Right.
And Booth points out that this exact moment of supreme exhaustion is when the tempter arrives.
The tempter.
Yes. It presents a simple, brutal, binary choice to a starving man: starve or steal.
But let me play devil's advocate here, because this is a massive pushback you hear even today.
Okay, let's hear it.
And it was certainly the dominant narrative in 1890 among the upper classes.
Oh, absolutely.
Many comfortable, wealthy people assumed that the homeless were all just, to use a really derogatory phrase from the era, Cockney scum.
Yeah, that wasn't the popular view.
They assumed these were lifelong, multi-generational city loafers who were born in the London slums, inherited a genetic distaste for hard work, and were just inherently lazy.
Right, the idea that they chose that life.
Exactly. So if that's the narrative, then charity is useless.
Right.
How does Booth's text systematically dismantle this assumption?
Well, Booth attacks that prevailing assumption not with sentimentality, but with hard empirical data.
Again, the numbers.
Always the numbers. This data was gathered from his own Salvation Army labor bureaus.
Okay.
When his officers systematically investigated the backgrounds and origins of the homeless sleeping on the streets, the statistical results were absolutely shocking to the Victorian public.
What did they find?
60% of the destitute men they interviewed were not native Londoners at all.
Wait, really? 60%?
Yes, they were country folk.
Oh, wow.
They were skilled or semi-skilled agricultural workers who had come to the city hoping to better themselves.
Right, seeking opportunity.
Exactly. Perhaps they were driven out of the country by the mechanization of farming.
That makes sense.
They arrived in London, couldn't find their footing in a hyper-competitive industrial market, their meager savings ran out, and they fell rapidly into the abyss.
Wow.
They weren't Cockney scum. They were the casualties of massive urban migration and structural economic shifts.
And there is another statistic in the text that completely blew my mind.
Which one?
When they did the census of the streets, they found that 20% of the homeless men they interviewed were Army Reserve men.
Yes. Ex-military.
Tommy Atkins, the quintessential British soldiers who had served the Queen across the globe.
It's wild. 1 in 5 of the men sleeping rough on the embankment had served in the British military.
That is shameful.
It really is. They had learned discipline, they had fought in the sweltering heat of the colonies to expand the empire.
Right.
And when their service was done and they were discharged, society simply had no place for them.
And Booth levers this heavily, doesn't he?
He leverages it heavily to shame the nation.
Yeah.
He asks, quite pointedly, how a fiercely patriotic nation can allow the very men who fought its wars and bled for its glory to rot on the stone abutments of the Thames.
It's a great question.
And this data, the fact that 60% are of country origins and 20% have military backgrounds, sets the stage perfectly for Booth's grand solution.
Because it proves they can work.
Exactly. It proves empirically that these people have the inherent capacity for rigorous discipline and hard agricultural labor if only someone provides the structure.
Which brings us to the actual blueprint.
Yes, finally.
Because after dragging the reader through the full, suffocating weight of this misery, the listener, just like the reader in 1890, desperately needs a solution.
We need the way out.
Exactly. If the state's workhouses are a humiliating, punitive failure, and if random charity is just a Band-Aid, what is Booth's alternative?
Right.
He introduces a massive, interconnected, three-part logistical machine.
A huge pipeline.
And the first step, phase one of deliverance, is what he calls the city colony.
Yes, this city colony. This is the immediate triage mechanism.
Okay.
It is the first point of contact. Booth was a deeply religious man, obviously, but he was also a supreme pragmatist.
Right.
He understood that you cannot preach theology to a starving man.
Makes sense.
He says explicitly in the text that a man with his head underwater cannot listen to a sermon.
That is a great quote.
So the very first non-negotiable step is the establishment of massive receiving houses, or food and shelter depots.
Located right in the heart of the slums.
Exactly.
And the scale of these places was already staggering before the book was even published.
Oh, he's already doing it.
Yeah, he was running prototypes.
Yeah.
By 1889, his depots had served over 3.5 million meals.
3.5 million.
Yeah. The text lists the specific quantities to ground the reality of this operation.
What were the numbers?
116,400 gallons of soup.
Wow.
192.5 tons of bread.
Tons of bread.
Yeah, 140 tons of potatoes.
That is industrial scale.
Right. This isn't theoretical boutique charity. It is a highly optimized feeding operation designed to process thousands of people a day.
But Booth was absolutely adamant against mere handouts.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He believed deeply that unearned charity eroded a person's character and perpetuated dependency.
So what did he do?
Well, physically attached to every shelter, he established the factory for the out-of-works.
Okay, a factory.
This was a place where a destitute man could immediately earn his keep.
Like doing what?
He could earn the 4 pence required for his food and shelter by performing simple, accessible labor.
Right.
Like chopping firewood, making coarse mats, or cobbling shoes.
Oh, so anyone could do it.
Exactly. It provided immediate physical sustenance, but it demanded labor in return, which was the crucial mechanism for restoring a man's dignity.
Right. He wasn't a beggar. He was a worker paying his way.
Mm-hmm.
And integrated into this city colony is the Labor Bureau, which I found to be a revolutionary economic idea for the time.
It really was ahead of its time.
It acted as a universal, free intermediary between employers who needed labor and the unemployed who needed wages.
Right.
Booth specifically designed this to bypass what he called the sweating middleman.
Oh, the middleman.
Yeah, he gives a great example of how this exploitation worked with the firms that farmed out sandwich board men.
Okay, how did that work?
If a business wanted men to walk up and down the streets carrying advertising boards, they didn't hire the men directly.
They used a contractor.
Exactly. They paid a middleman. And that middleman took a massive cut of the fee for doing absolutely nothing but holding the ledger.
While the actual man walking the streets in the rain got barely enough pennies to survive.
Exactly. Booth's Labor Bureau aimed to cut out that middleman entirely, connecting the worker directly to the wage.
And the core philosophy underlying the entire city colony, the shelters, the factories, the bureau, is what Booth defines as docility and discipline.
Docility and discipline.
Right. The city colony is not designed to be a permanent home for anyone.
It's temporary.
It is a sorting mechanism. It tests the individual.
How does it test them?
When a man comes in, the officers observe him. Is he willing to work the wood chopping block? Will he follow the rules of the shelter?
Right.
If the man shows docility, meaning a genuine willingness to be led and to follow instructions, and if he submits to the discipline of the factory, he proves to Booth that he is ready to be lifted up to the next level.
I see.
The city colony effectively separates those who genuinely want to rebuild their lives from those who refuse to change their habits.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
If we look at the city colony, it operates exactly like a triage tent on a battlefield.
That's a great analogy.
It stops the immediate bleeding. It gets the fallen cab horse back on its feet, bandages its knees, and gives it a meal.
Right.
But a triage tent isn't a long-term rehabilitation hospital.
No, it's not.
You can't just keep thousands of men in a triage tent forever. And if you just discharge them back into the exact same streets, they'll just wander back out into the crossfire of the slums and fall down again.
Exactly. The triage is only step one.
Right.
Once a man is fed, sobered up, and proven willing to work in the city, where does he go?
Yeah.
If you just turn him loose in London, a city that already suffers from chronic overpopulation and a massive deficit of jobs,
he's doomed.
He will inevitably fall right back into the malaria of the slums.
So what's the solution?
He must be physically, geographically removed from the environment that destroyed him. And that vital realization is what drives phases 2 and 3 of the master plan, the farm colony and the colony oversea.
So phase 2 is the farm colony.
Right.
The concept is to take these rehabilitated, disciplined workers who have proven themselves in the city colony and move them entirely out of London onto a massive agricultural training estate out in the country.
And this is exactly why those statistics we discussed earlier about the homeless being 60% country folk and 20% ex-military are the linchpin of the whole plan.
Oh, everything connects.
It does. Booth isn't trying to take lifelong, multi-generational urbanites and teach them a completely alien set of skills.
Yeah.
He is returning country people to the land they understand.
Right.
And he is utilizing the ingrained discipline of former soldiers to help provide structure to the community.
That's brilliant.
At the farm colony, it isn't just digging ditches. They learn modern agriculture, intensive farming techniques, brick-making, carpentry, and cooperative living.
Wow, real skills.
Yes. They are physically separated from the gin palaces and the squalor of the city.
They're out in the fresh air.
Breathing clean air, eating food they grew themselves, and steadily regaining their physical muscle and their moral strength.
But even the farm colony, as idyllic as it sounds, is also just a way station in Booth's grand design.
It's just a stepping stone.
Right. The final step, phase 3, is the colony oversea.
Yes.
This is universal, highly organized emigration.
Taking these fully trained, rehabilitated, physically robust individuals and exporting them to places like Canada, Australia, and South Africa. And if we connect this to the bigger picture of the 19th century, the geopolitical brilliance of this pipeline is undeniable.
How so?
Victorian England was suffering from a massive structural imbalance.
Okay.
They had way too much cheap labor and not enough land or jobs in the urban centers. Meanwhile, the British Empire possessed vast, sprawling colonies that had endless tracts of uncultivated land, but a desperate, crippling shortage of labor, particularly agricultural workers and domestic servants.
Okay.
So Booth's pipeline takes the so-called waste human material of London, processes it through the city colony, trains and toughens it in the farm colony, and then exports it across the ocean to where it is economically most valuable.
But I have to push back here.
Yeah.
Because on paper, a 3-step pipeline sounds almost too neat.
It does sound a bit like a factory line.
Exactly. It sounds like a factory schematic. How do you actually take a broken, drink-sodden individual, someone who has been sleeping on the embankment for a year, whose spirit is crushed, and turn them into a rugged, self-sufficient agricultural pioneer in the Canadian wilderness?
Right.
Is it really just a matter of giving them some fresh air and a shovel?
Well, Booth was incredibly, almost ruthlessly realistic about this point.
Oh, he was?
Yeah. He insisted that you cannot just change a person's circumstances. You must simultaneously change their character. This is where the religious, spiritual engine of the Salvation Army becomes the beating heart of the logistics.
Right.
Booth argues that if you just take a hopeless drunkard, give him a clean house, a good job, and a plot of land, within 6 months, he will be back in the gutter having pawned all his new furniture for drink.
Because the core issue hasn't been fixed.
Exactly. The internal character has to be renewed.
Like, how do they do that?
The farm colony wasn't just about learning to plant potatoes. It was a highly structured, disciplined, spiritually focused environment.
Okay.
It was designed to rebuild the moral framework of the individual through constant encouragement, religious conviction, and the dignity of hard work.
I see.
Only when both circumstance and character were transformed did Booth consider a person ready for the colony oversea.
Okay, so the 3-tier colony system, city triage, farm training, overseas opportunity, is a brilliant, comprehensive pipeline.
It really is.
But there is a glaring catch.
What's that?
This system only works for the people who actually have the strength to walk through the front doors of the city colony. Right. What about the people who are trapped too deep in the jungle to even find their way out?
The ones who are totally lost.
Yeah, the people who are so physically degraded, so sick, or so deeply entangled in the criminal underworld that they cannot or will not seek help.
And Booth knew he couldn't just sit in his headquarters and wait for the most desperate to come to him.
He had to go to them.
Yes. He needed proactive, highly specialized rescue expeditions to go into the darkest parts of the forest.
Wow.
And this brings us to what we might call the elite forces of the Salvation Army's social wing.
And none of these forces are more compelling or more heroic, to me at least, than the Slum Sisters.
Oh, the Slum Sisters are incredible.
These were young women, many of them born into comfortable, sheltered middle-class homes, who volunteered to leave their lives behind and live in the absolute worst, most dangerous dens of the slums.
The text provides incredible granular details about their daily work.
What did they do?
They didn't just commute to the slums to hand out tracts and then go home to a nice suburb.
Right.
They lived there 24/7, all year round.
Wow.
The sources describe a specific visit to a slum in New York's Cherry Hill district, which was notorious worldwide.
Cherry Hill, yeah.
Two slum sisters, an American named Em and a young Swedish girl named Maddie, had taken up permanent residence in a tenement building that was locally infamous as a former murder house.
Right, a murder house.
Huh.
And they lived in this tiny, suffocating room, sleeping on hard cots, constantly fighting off the vermin that literally fell from the ceilings and crawled out of the walls.
Just horrifying conditions.
And the contrast their presence provided to the chaos around them was stunning.
It was night and day.
The text describes another scene in a London slum where a violent, swearing virago-like, a woman screaming absolute curses and threatening to physically knock the vitals out of the men around her.
Right.
She is completely disarmed and silenced by the peaceful, steady, unflinching presence of a slum sister, quietly going about her work.
The Slum Sisters fought the devil with soap and water just as fiercely as they fought with scripture.
Soap and water.
Yes. They would enter tenement rooms where the floors were literally worse than the street pavements outside.
Gosh.
Rooms where ashes and filth had accumulated for days, where sick mothers lay entirely helpless in the corner.
And what would they do?
The sisters would roll up their sleeves, scrub the floors, nurse the sick, care for the neglected children, and provide a living, breathing example of love and basic decency in environments where modesty was an absolute impossibility and vice was a second nature.
It's incredible. I picture the Slum Sisters like special ops medics dropping behind enemy lines.
That's a perfect image.
They're going into deeply hostile territory, entirely unarmed except for their faith and a scrubbing brush, and they are setting up a field hospital right in the middle of a war zone.
Exactly.
But how did these young women, some of them born ladies, survive in environments where the walls were literally crawling with vermin and violence was an everyday occurrence?
They survived through an absolute radical, almost incomprehensible commitment to their mission. Booth notes that they consciously lived the life of the crucified for the sake of the people they were trying to save.
Right.
They understood deeply that to reach people who were entirely distrustful of traditional, wealthy, patronizing clergymen, they had to live on an equal, undeniable plane of poverty.
That makes total sense.
They wore coarse, patched gowns, they ate the exact same scanty food as their neighbors, and they became an integrated, trusted part of the community.
They weren't outsiders anymore.
Now, they didn't preach at the poor, they suffered with them.
And the Slum Sisters were just one branch of this elite force. There was also the Prison Gate Brigade.
Ah, yes.
Booth recognized that the exact moment a criminal is released from prison, like stepping through those gates, is the moment of their absolute maximum vulnerability.
It really is.
If they're left alone, they will fail.
Uh-huh.
So the brigade met them right at the gate.
Yes. Booth understood that Victorian society often acts as a crushing press on a former convict.
Oh, absolutely.
They come out bearing a massive stigma, entirely unable to find honest work without references.
Right. And almost always, their old criminal associates are waiting right outside the prison walls to pull them back into the underworld.
Just waiting to pounce.
The Prison Gate Brigade intercepted them at that exact crossroads, offering immediate alternative support.
Do we have any examples of this?
The text shares the story of Old Dan.
Old Dan.
A man who had served several long penal servitude sentences. He was met at the gates, taken into a Salvation Army home, given honest work, and eventually became a respectable, law-abiding tradesman.
Wow.
And then there's the incredible story of W., an organist who had stolen silver and fled.
Okay, an organist.
He was on the run, but was so deeply moved by hearing a hymn played at a Salvation Army mission that he voluntarily turned himself in, served his time, and when he was released, he was met by the brigade, saved, and eventually put in charge of a mission himself.
That is amazing. They also established rescue homes for fallen women, offering a safe, non-judgmental refuge at any hour of the day or night.
These homes didn't just hide them away, they taught them practical trades, like commercial laundry or machine knitting.
Giving them actual skills.
Yeah, preparing them for domestic service or for a completely new life via emigration to the colonies.
Exactly.
And then, perhaps the most fascinating logistical branch was the inquiry office.
Oh, the inquiry office is wild.
Which essentially operated like a massive 19th century detective agency exclusively for the poor.
It really was. The inquiry office was created to address the terrifying hidden reality that 18,000 people went missing in London every single year.
18,000 people.
Yes. When a poor girl disappeared in the city, her rural parents couldn't possibly afford a private detective.
No, of course not.
And the Metropolitan Police were often helpless or indifferent unless a major crime was proven.
Right.
The Salvation Army, however, had a vast global network.
How did they use it?
They used their ubiquitous publications, like the War Cry, and their 10,000 officers stationed in almost every town to act as a massive human telegraph network to track people down.
The success stories from the inquiry office are wild, almost cinematic.
They really are.
Like, they tracked down a lost husband who had sailed on the Dominion liner Oregon heading to Canada.
Wow.
They used their network to trace his movements, discovering he had tragically jumped overboard during the voyage.
That's sad.
It is. But because they found the truth, they were able to help the widow seek the compensation she was owed.
Right, giving her closure and support.
And the most incredible story is about a girl named Greta.
Oh, the Greta story.
Yeah. An English traveler found a white girl living deep in a Hottentot kraal in South Africa, but he was unable to rescue her.
Okay.
He gets all the way back to England, sees an advertisement for the Salvation Army inquiry office, and reports what he saw.
Wow.
The office activates their network, and a Salvation Army rider in South Africa physically explores the bush, locates a specific kraal, and rescues her.
These elite forces, the sisters, the brigade, the inquiry office, showcase the psychological genius of Booth's crusades.
They really do.
They don't wait passively for people to hit absolute rock bottom and magically find the internal motivation to seek help.
No, they are incredibly proactive.
They actively interrupt the cycle of despair at critical, high-leverage junctures.
Right.
At the prison release store during acute sickness in the slum tenement, at the exact moment a runaway arrives at the train station.
Yeah.
They intercept the vulnerable before the abyss swallows them entirely.
So what does this all mean? We've laid out a stunning, comprehensive plan. It is a beautiful blueprint.
It is.
But here is the multi-million-dollar question that every skeptic in 1890 was asking.
Okay, what is it?
Is it just a utopian fantasy? Who exactly pays for this massive pipeline of city colonies, farm colonies, overseas colonies, slum sisters, and detective agencies?
Right, the funding.
And practically speaking, who operates it?
Well, Booth was a dreamer, but he was also a hardcore pragmatist.
Right.
He priced out his revolution down to the penny.
Oh, he had a budget.
He did. You calculated that he needed £1 million to execute the scheme properly.
£1 million.
Yes. Specifically, he asked the public for £100,000 in immediate cash to launch the infrastructure.
Okay.
And an endowment that would yield £30,000 annually to sustain it.
£1 million in 1890 is a colossal, eye-watering sum.
That's an insane amount of money.
How on earth did he justify asking the British public for that much money?
He justified it by exposing the staggering financial waste of the status quo.
Okay.
He noted that the state was already wasting £10 million every single year on poor law relief, workhouses, and prisons that fixed absolutely nothing.
Wow, $10 million a year on a broken system.
Exactly. It merely warehoused the misery and perpetuated the cycle.
Right.
But his most brilliant rhetorical argument was comparing social rescue to the nation's military expenditures.
Oh, this is a masterful argument.
It really is.
He points out that when the British Empire needs to rescue its citizens abroad, it spares absolutely no expense.
None at all.
He cites the Magdala expedition, where Lord Napier marched a massive army into Abyssinia simply to rescue 2 captive British representatives.
Just 2 people.
Right. That single expedition cost the taxpayers £9 million.
£9 million.
And the Ashanti War, fought on the Gold Coast to liberate captives and protect trade, cost £750,000.
Booth essentially corners his readers and asks a very direct question.
Which is?
If Great Britain can proudly spend £9 million to rescue 2 diplomats from a foreign king, why can't it spend 1/9 of that to rescue 3 million of its own citizens who are prisoners of starvation and despair right here in London?
Wow, that is such a mic drop.
It's a masterful move, shifting the perspective of the funding from charity for the weak to a matter of national defense against a domestic enemy.
Okay, so if the public gives him the money, who actually runs this massive operation? The government?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Booth argues forcefully that the state, with its endless red tape and bureaucratic indifference, is completely incapable of the necessary flexibility and moral engagement required to save human souls.
So who does it?
The engine to run this master plan is the Salvation Army itself.
Oh, of course.
By 1890, the scale of the army was already immense, functioning almost like a parallel state.
Really?
Yeah. It operated in 34 countries, had 10,000 full-time dedicated officers, and circulated over 33 million pieces of literature annually.
But it's not just their size that makes them the right engine, it's who they are.
Exactly.
The officers aren't Oxford-educated aristocrats coming down from the West End to patronize the poor.
Right. Booth operates on the old proverb, set a rogue to catch a rogue. The Salvation Army's most effective officers and converts were dug out of the very same pits they were now trying to empty.
That makes so much sense.
Booth understood that reformed people make the absolute best agents of reform because they intimately understand the language, the specific temptations, and the crushing despair of the slums.
Right.
A Salvation Army captain can speak to a hopeless drunkard in a tap room because, 5 years prior, that captain was the hopeless drunkard in that tap room.
The empathy is visceral and undeniable. But to organize the absolute chaos of 3 million destitute people, Booth relies on something that made polite Victorian society very, very uncomfortable.
Yes, he did.
Absolute obedience and strict military discipline.
Right.
He demanded that his officers obey orders like soldiers on a battlefield, without question.
Exactly.
Was this demand for total obedience seen as dictatorial or dangerous at the time?
It absolutely was. He was heavily criticized by journalists and politicians for it.
Really?
Yeah. Critics warn that in a modern democratic age, a spiritual despotism led by one general would never be tolerated and could become dangerous.
So how did he defend it?
Booth's defense was purely pragmatic. He argued that you cannot organize a mutinous, bewildered, starving mob with committee meetings, voting, and parliamentary debates.
That's true.
You need a firm, regimented structure with real captains giving clear orders.
Right.
Furthermore, he argued that the destitute were already subjected to a far more brutal, arbitrary discipline.
What's that?
The merciless tyranny of the sweating employer who could fire them on a whim, and the constant lethal threat of starvation.
Oh, wow.
Compared to that tyranny, the rigorous, benevolent discipline of the Salvation Army, which actually provided food, shelter, and a path upward, was an escape into genuine freedom.
It's the stark difference between being a helpless slave to starvation and being a purposeful soldier in an army of salvation.
Yes.
A radical reframing of what authority means.
And he proved empirically that it worked.
Well, he did.
He pointed to his prototype city colonies filled with hundreds of the most difficult, desperate, previously lawless men.
Okay.
He noted that police were never required inside the shelters.
Oh.
The men themselves began to enforce the order and discipline of the shelter because they deeply respected the authority that was actually feeding them and treating them like human beings rather than statistics.
As we wrap up this deep dive, let's just take a moment to recap the staggering ambition of William Booth's vision.
It really is staggering.
He wasn't just asking for a little more charity to buy a few more bowls of soup for the winter.
No.
He was proposing a complete top-to-bottom restructuring of the social safety net.
Right?
He wanted a comprehensive system built on radical empathy for the fallen, rigorous discipline to rebuild broken character, and incredibly practical global logistics.
Exactly.
Moving people from the immediate triage of the city to the rehabilitative training of the farm to the boundless opportunity of a new world.
And he conceptualized and built all of this while staring unblinkingly into a depth of human misery that made other, more credentialed reformers simply fold their hands in despair.
We opened this discussion by comparing Booth's book to a master blueprint. We explore the dense jungles of his African metaphor, the grim mechanics of the workhouse, and the brilliant logistics of his colonies.
We covered a lot.
But as we close, there is a final new thought to consider.
Okay.
We've spent this time talking about Booth dragging the submerged 10th into the light, making the invisible visible through his vast network of shelters, colonies, and officers.
And this raises an important question, something for you to mull over as you look at our world today.
Yeah.
Booth's entire strategy relied on physical intervention, a literal officer pulling a literal person out of a literal slum.
Right.
Today, our poverty has often become fundamentally invisible in a way Booth couldn't have imagined.
That's very true.
We don't just have physical slums, we have digital exile.
Digital exile.
We have algorithms managing gig workers, hidden away in cars and temporary motels, entirely disconnected from the physical community.
Wow.
If Booth's great triumph was charting the geography of darkest England, the question for us today is, well, who is charting the geography of our modern invisible despair?
That's a great question.
When the jungle isn't a physical place you can send a slum sister into, but a systemic, algorithmic isolation. How do we build a new city colony for the digital age?
Right.
It challenges us to realize that the mechanics of rescue must evolve, even if the desperate need for it remains exactly the same.
A profound challenge to leave us with. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into General Booth's revolutionary blueprint. We hope it has given you a new perspective on a remarkable piece of history and the ongoing fight for human dignity. Until next time, take care.